her role in this show is not over yet.
And it was just brutal to watch, wasn't it?
You just knew those moments, it was just leading somewhere.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to We Need to Talk About, a weekly video series where the Digital Spy team gather around to talk about the biggest moments in TV from this week. All series we've been covering House of the Dragon every week, and today is the finale. We just watched the final episode, and we're here to kind of break down the biggest points. I'm your host, as always, Ali, and I'm joined by my friends Emma and Janet. Say hello.
Hi everyone.
And yeah, before we jump into House of Dragon episode 10, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel and turn on those YouTube notifications so you can get whatever the next series of We Need to Talk About is as soon as it goes live. And without further ado, let's jump in and talk about the biggest moments from the House of the Dragon Series 1 finale. Okay, so the episode obviously opens with Rhaenyra learning about Viserys' death, and kind of the knock-on effect of that, apart from all the other things that happens, is that she goes into labour. Emma, do you want to talk to us about this latest birth scene in this show and kind of what Rhaenyra goes through in this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wanted to flag this up just because we've seen a lot of birth scenes throughout this series. There's been a lot of babies, but this one for me, I don't know about you guys, but for me this one was like the most brutal and hard to watch of all of them. But yeah, I mean, poor Rhaenyra, she's just found out that her father has died in a very kind of blunt way. It was, all very hurried. There was no gently breaking this news, and obviously this is shocking news, and the news about what the Greens are doing has triggered an early birth. And we hear, all the medical practitioners saying that she's not due for a couple of months, so the baby is coming early, and instantly we know something is not going well, it's going wrong. And it was such a difficult scene to watch because we know Rhaenyra as this very strong, powerful woman, and she is a really powerful character, and we're seeing her in such a vulnerable position here. I just found it so emotional to see her literally cowering in the corner, sort of refusing help from anyone. She's just, I think she knows in herself that something's not right. And it was just brutal to watch, wasn't it?
I'm glad that you brought this point up because I think through every birth scene that we've seen in House of the Dragon so far, I go back to Queen Aemma's comment to Rhaenyra when she was younger about a birth being a woman's battleground, or the birthing chambers being a woman's battleground. And every birth we've seen has been some kind of battle. Emma's birth was horrific and horrible and brutal. And then there was Laena's birth. That was some kind of brutal battle within herself as well. The choice that she had to make, the choices Daemon had to make. And then you see Rhaenyra give birth in that same episode as well. And she's forced to give that baby, to bring that baby to Alicent. Again, it's that whole tug and pull between this warring situation that happens. And then again, at the end, she learns about her father's death. It triggers early labour. And it's all fueled by this battlefield on a woman's birthing chambers, and it just, I think it just rings true throughout this whole season, and it was really difficult to watch. You're right. I don't know if I found it more difficult to watch than Emma's birth. I was
really shocked. I think it was, like you said, it was a super interesting scene. I think the fact that Rhaenyra goes into it alone is super interesting, and you have all the chambermaids that are like, let's help you. But I think it's almost worth saying, I was really shocked by how graphic this scene was. You see the unborn baby, I was quite shocked by it. I think I'm often shocked when TV shows show children who have died, or it's always quite an intense thing, and it's quite a choice, I think, to make. And obviously, we'll get to it, but you have the big parallel as Rhaenyra loses her child in this moment, and then at the end of the episode, obviously, spoilers, it's going to happen to her again. So the episode is sort of bookended by this like terrible loss for Rhaenyra. And I think by showing the audience the body of that baby, it was like, I was really kind of taken aback by it. I don't know if you guys found it quite, I found it quite shocking.
I did cry. I had a little tear in my eye. It was very emotional. I think it was very, like you said, it was very graphic from the beginning, from her kind of birthing this baby herself, putting her hands there and trying to coach this baby out. And then to see its lifeless body, that was hard to watch.
I mean, I think it, as much as it, it is a graphic show, I think Game of Thrones, we didn't see this kind of graphic nature. It's kind of a different type of graphic content. And I think it's important. It is important that they're fully showing the brutality of birth and what can happen to women, especially in, I know it's fantasy, but in these times, and it was a really important thing to show that, I think, as difficult and unpleasant as it was to watch. And I think because this show so much revolves around gender roles, that was just such an important thing to show. And Ali, you mentioned like parallels. I thought the parallel of Rhaenyra, giving birth on her own, and then in the other room, her husband Daemon is making plans for war, and it's like all the men were around the table making these decisions behind her back while she's in this hugely vulnerable position. So I thought that was another interesting dynamic. But yeah, absolutely like heartbreaking to watch, but definitely really important. And I'm kind of glad that this show has like drawn attention to all of these different issues that can happen.
Often when we see birth on TV, it's all very nicely done and very, quite tame and quite gentle with it. And we don't often see the impacts of what can happen during birth. You might hear about it. It's all very muted, so to speak. But this is very loud and very in your face, but very impactful at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Daemon comparison is really interesting and brings us nicely onto, I think, the other big thing one of the other big things we want to talk about from this episode. Janet, do you want to talk to me a little bit about what Daemon gets up to in this episode? And obviously, like Emma said, whilst Rhaenyra is going through this ordeal, Daemon is in the other room, kind of almost conspiring. Like he's up to stuff in this episode, isn't he?
Daemon almost goes from 0 to 100 instantly. The minute that Rhaenys comes into Dragonstone and mentions that Viserys is dead, he's like, right, they've conspired against it. It's murder. They've killed him. His head is literally about to explode. And I think we often don't really think about Daemon as an emotional person, but I wonder if Viserys' death just triggers all those emotions in him. And I wonder if that's some way of him not dealing with his grief, because there's that scene where he's quick to say that the Greens are conspiring against them, that they've done this on purpose, they've killed Viserys. Then there's when the King's Guards are there and he's kind of urging them to swear fealty to Rhaenyra or die by dragon's fire. It's all very blunt, very to the point. He wants war, he wants it now. And then there's obviously that scene where Rhaenyra's trying to talk to him about the Song of Ice and Fire, and he tries to choke her. It's like, who is this Daemon? Like I thought we'd evolved past this. I thought we'd gotten over this stage where he was so impulsive, but it seems that his emotions are really driving him, and his grief over Viserys is driving him. I don't think he's really thinking properly. I think he's really clouded. And I always find Daemon a really interesting character because there are so many dualities to him. There's so much intricacy to him. And I think it's so easy to either paint him as the villain or, the former villain. But I think there's so much more to him.
Yeah, he's very difficult to read as well. For me in this episode, there were multiple points where I kind of questioned what he was doing and whether he was going to go against Rhaenyra. Janet, you mentioned the scene with the King's Guards and, saying you need to swear loyalty. Before he said you need to swear loyalty to Rhaenyra, I was like, is he going to make them swear loyalty to him. I was like, is he gonna?
No, never.
Because he like took them away. There was like
Yeah.
a flickering moment where I was like, what is he doing here? But I feel like he is one of those characters that we're always going to question, because he is very spontaneous, as you said. Like he's instantly going, oh, Viserys has been murdered, this, that, and the other. He jumps to conclusions very quickly, and he acts very quickly. So I never know where we stand with Daemon. I feel like he's just going to be one of those characters where he is very spontaneous.
Reminded, I think, Janet, I think what you said is so interesting about, like, I hadn't really thought about Daemon's actions being influenced by grief. And I reminded of conversations we've had throughout this series, back, rest in peace, when Viserys was alive, where you were kind of like reminding us that, you know, he's been grieving for Aemma like the whole show. And it's interesting to think about the way that Daemon acts in comparison with that. And like, oh yeah, it is grief. And actually Daemon's like also lost a lot, like a lot of these characters are. And Daemon loses two children in this episode, you know, like in a similar way, which is super interesting. The thing I was reminded of, I think, with the Daemon turn and the way that he starts to act out almost and kind of does these things outside of Rhaenyra's control, despite being kind of her second in command. I was reminded a lot of last episode when we saw what happened with Alicent, and kind of the way in which Alicent's grips loosened slightly, and suddenly all of these men that surround these powerful female characters suddenly like leap into action, and their first response is like violence and war. And I think it was very similar way, and we have, you know, the scene with Rhaenyra's around a table with kind of lots of generals, and they're suddenly saying, we should do this, this, this. You know, Daemon's off sending ravens to people without her permission. I thought it was definitely like a comparison there between the way they both sort of, like they took their eye off the ball for a second for valid reasons, and suddenly everyone has got their own motivations.
Yeah, she's trying to massage, like, peace and do things gently and kind of, like, take her own inheritance, yes, but also at what cost is what she says. At what cost do I take this inheritance? What cost do I take the Iron Throne? We have to put the realm first. And it's similar with Alicent. Like, she doesn't want to barge Rhaenyra out the way. She sees it as her duty to kind of place Aegon as king because of what Viserys said. But she doesn't want war. But these men, like you said, are working behind the scenes to kind of turn the tide that way. So it just takes one of these women to act out of step, and then we're going for war. We're going straight there.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we've spoken before about how, like, very ruthless and blunt both Alicent and Rhaenyra can be, but it's kind of like they have to be. Like, women in this world, like, if they, you know, lose track for 1 second, they're not paying attention for a couple of minutes, the men can swoop in and take control from them. So they kind of just have to be. You know, they've been brought up, you know, from a young age in this brutal environment. So they have to keep their own control. They have to make these really bold, brash decisions.
Speaking of women that have to kind of strike out on their own and make bold, brash decisions, that brings us nicely on to the other kind of the minor player of this episode, but the absolute icon that is Rhaenys Targaryen, back at it again. I wanted to talk a little bit about the return sort of House Velaryon in this episode, and kind of what Rhaenys and Corlys get up to. In previous episodes, the past two episodes, we've noticed the lack of Corlys. Obviously, last week or the week before, perhaps, when Daemon was murdered and Corlys is kind of off to sea, we've been wondering where he is. And in this episode, we see that he is A, he is alive, and B, he is kind of back up at it again. Rhaenyra basically kind of like petitions Rhaenys again to join their force, because the number of allies that the Blacks have is quite small, but with the strength of the Velaryon fleet, suddenly the kind of possibilities are opened up for them. And obviously we see that in this episode when Corlys arrives in the chamber. We have another person making a dramatic entrance into a room with a cane and saying, you know, we can take charge. Oh, and also, by the way, I control the Stepstones. I've finally beaten the Triarchy, and here's what we can do. I thought it was really, I was just really excited to see Corlys and Rhaenys together in a scene again. I think they're such fascinating characters, and Rhaenys does so much in this episode with so little. She's just kind of in the background of scenes so often. It's so good. She's just sort of like smirking or looking, or I'm just so happy to see her again.
I love how powerful Rhaenys is. She just straight away puts him in his place. Like, you left me. We were both grieving. We both lost. And you up and left. I also found it very interesting how he was ready to back out, because he was so gung-ho about the Velaryon name and getting the Velaryons on the Iron Throne, and seeing the house name rise and rise in ranks. But this time he's been beaten. He's lost his children. Even though he's gained the stepstones, he's come back injured. He just wants to go off in peace now. And Rhaenys is like, no, now is not the time. Now is not the time to back down. We need to side with Rhaenyra. We need to give her our support. I love the way she was like, these men are urging for war, and she's the only one with an ounce of sense, basically, who's just trying to think of the right way, the peaceful way to urge, to lead, I want to say King's Landing, to lead the city, to lead them. And so it was just very interesting to see the way she operates throughout this episode.
Yeah, 100%. I loved her holding Corlys to account in that moment, and saying, why'd you leave at the most crucial moment? But yeah, I mean, it was really wonderful to see more of their relationship as well. The brief moments we have had of them on screen throughout the series, I think, have been really interesting, because I think their marriage dynamic is very different to a lot of the other relationships we see in this universe. They actually do listen to each other, which is rare. It's really interesting to see that. But also Corlys coming back with his really strong sort of family values was really interesting, because he did comment on the fact that Rhaenyra has wronged them in the past on several occasions. into quite extreme extents, but yeah, he when he comes into the room with everyone and makes his lovely dramatic entrance, he does kind of look over to his 4 grandchildren, and I think in that moment he was just like, this is what it's about my family,
this is what I'm doing it for.
And I'm doing it for them. Yeah, so that was a really lovely moment as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it until when he looks over, and because obviously we've seen the tension around how he thinks about Rhaenyra and Harwin Strong's kids, like whether he thinks of them as family or not. And I think in that moment when he walks into the room and Baelor and Rhaenyra walk immediately over to Lucerys and Jacaerys, and you see them as a 4, which is so weird because they're related. But I think for Corlys in that moment, that's the final kind of brick in the thing that says, this is my family, actually. As much as I maybe wish things were different, this in this moment is, like you said, Emma, I have a unit that I need to protect.
I think you get a little bit of that before, when he's coaching Lucerys about taking over Driftmark. Yes, he wants the Velaryon name there, but also you see some care with how he speaks to Lucerys and how he kind of advises him and supports him in that way. And just to speak on his relationship with Rhaenys, I think you guys are right. There is a difference in their relationship to the way other people operate, and I thought it was really interesting when I interviewed Eve Best and Steve Toussaint, and how they were saying that their match was actually a love match, and that was something that they asked about before going into this characterization between Rhaenys and Corlys, whether they were bonded by love or whether it was an arranged kind of situation. And I think you see that love come through in the way in which they talk to each other, the way in which they listen to each other, and the way in which they move as a unit. Even though Corlys has been gone and Rhaenys was upset about that, the way they come together again, it's just, you can see a lot of the elements there is coming from love.
I immediately actually thought of that as well, Janet, that interview where they talk about being equal partners and kind of and having that balance. It's so interesting. And yeah, I was really glad to see they have small moments in this episode, but talking of the Velaryons, I was really happy to see Rhaenyra and Baelor clearly being positioned to be something in the show again. Like, they still don't have any lines in this episode, which I think is a shame. But they have, you know, the moment when they walk in with Rhaenyra when she has the crown on, and she brings, like, Rhaenyra brings her the cup, and Rhaenyra, like, looks at both the girls and, like, brings them with her to the table. I thought was a really nice, like, it's a small moment, but a moment of, like, inclusion and including them in the conversation. It doesn't go so smoothly for all the children of the Targaryens in this episode. Let's talk about, for point number 4, that final fight, that final moment. Obviously, we have the kind of build-up throughout the episode of, like, who's gonna strike first.
Oh my God! No! What are you doing?
Cut it in half.
And things really, I don't know, I can't even talk about it. We're, like, getting choked up. Yeah, they escalate. Janet, will you please talk to me about the final, like, 6 minutes of this episode and the big thing that happens?
I think we knew it was always going to end badly. From the minute that Rhaenyra let those children go, there was something in the air. There was something in the way she looked at them. There was something in the way she looked at Lucerys in particular. And there was that look in his face when he calls her mum instead of your grace, and that you just knew those moments. It was just leading somewhere. And it was, I don't know about you, but I sat and I watched that and I was like, I feel uncomfortable. I feel nervous. I feel so nervous and uncomfortable. Then he flies out there. He's very uncertain. He gets there. And I know you can't not notice Vhagar, but I didn't make the association between Vhagar being there and Aemon being there. For some reason, I was like, did he come with 2 dragons? That dragon looks decidedly bigger than, like, quite big. Walks in there, there's Aemon, and you just know it is about to go down. Then, you know, Lucerys tries his best to stand his ground and say, you know, Baratheons, remember your place. Baratheons are not having it because Baratheons are Baratheons. And he tries to leave, and Aemon demands an eye. Again, let it go. You lost your eye, you got a dragon. I thought you'd made peace with that, but hey-ho.
I know, like, do you know what? He looks cool with the eye patch. You know, you should just own it. Get over it.
He's got, like, a little purple, he's got a glowy purple eye now as well, which is quite fun.
Yeah.
Don't take it off. You are not a White Walker. We do not need to see that. And so, when he's about to spill blood, I can't remember the Baratheon's name, the Lord.
Boris.
Lord Baratheon. Boris, thank you. Basically says, no, not here on my turf. I didn't get comfortable because I almost forgot the Game of Thrones rule. Never love a character too much. And Rhaenyra's children are just so freaking cute that you just feel like you want to protect them, but that's a mistake because Game of Thrones will take that away from you. He goes outside, he jumps on his dragon, there's rain, there's hell, there's a thunderstorm. It's basically London, basically yesterday. He flies off, he tries his best to get out of the way, and then you see Vhagar looming ahead. And then the ultimate moment happens. He tries to escape. He He gets into a clearing. It's clear skies. We know it's not clear skies. We know. And then because Lucerys' dragon shot fire first at Vhagar seems to be a proud dragon. Proud dragon. I must say that Lucerys' dragon shot fire first, but not under Lucerys' command. Lucerys tried to urge Arraxis away from this. Wasn't listening, and so Vhagar opens up that large mouth and chomps the whole dragon, but bar the wings, Lucerys.
Yeah, I think the interesting, like, obviously it was like, it looked incredible. It was a really shocking moment. I think, Emma, you had mentioned this to me earlier, like the one of the interesting things that happens here is that it happens as a result of the dragons, like, disobeying the orders. Like, suddenly neither boy is in control of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Aemon obviously did want to threaten and possibly harm Lucerys in some way, but he definitely didn't want to kill him or kill the dragon or any, you know, none of that. And
you see that look, don't you? Like, I went too far.
Yeah. There's just that moment of panic, and he's shouting at the end. He's like, no. And it's just, it's heartbreaking. It's awful. But yeah, neither of the dragons obeying their masters. I mean, it's kind of that little thing where you see, like, a little chihuahua yapping at a Great Dane. Like, there was this enormous dragon, and then Lucerys' little one Arrax just comes in and, you know, he just can't help himself. He's got to blast some flame at him. And that's where it all goes downhill, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it is this heartbreaking moment where Aemond realises, oh my God, what have I done? And I think he knows now, whether or not Alicent had warned him before he'd gone out, don't, you know, fight or anything, similar to what Rhaenyra said to Lucerys. But he just panics in that moment, and I think he knows, right, this is serious now. This means war. Yeah,
that's the thing, right? This is the moment that again, like a lot of the show has been these accidental things that happen, and then things cascade. I thought what was interesting about the dragons disobeying orders, I was reminded again of the conversation that pre-time skip Rhaenyra has with Viserys about dragons. And Viserys basically is I can't remember exactly what he says, but he basically is like, people think of House Targaryen as like, our biggest strength is our dragons, but basically having them is also a curse. Like, they aren't, it's kind of like the Targaryen myth, right? Like, this idea that they have ultimate control over these like all-powerful beings. Like, even in this episode, Daemon and the guys around the table say to Rhaenyra, like, well, why are we talking about the number of men we have? Like, you have dragons, and that means victory. That means powerful. Like, it means nothing can stop you. And then in this scene, we're reminded that, like, that these are dangerous things that are wielded, like, can often be wielded by people that don't know how to use them. And then if they suddenly change their minds, they don't want to listen to Targaryen because they can. Then suddenly it's like,
they don't have to.
Exactly, it's this like illusion of power, right? It's like this idea that we wield dragons and therefore we're unstoppable, but that's only works as long as the dragons agree to be kind of part of that equation. And I think there's some foreshadowing happening here around like, dragons are dangerous, like full stop. Like Viserys said, like we've heard before, when dragons go to war, everybody dies basically, and that's we see it happen here. They're dangerous no matter what. Well, speaking of the future then, and what this holds, that was obviously the final scene in House of Dragon episode 10. Before we wrap up, I would love to know what both of your kind of big brain predictions for season 2 are going to be. We know that the show's going to come back at some point, and we know that there's a lot more story to tell. So I'm just curious to know, roughly, what are your one or two things that you have got in the barrel that you think is going to happen? Emma, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, my main prediction is about dragons, of course. We see in this episode a little tasty treat of a enormous dragon that Daemon is singing to in a cave. I think, after doing some digging, that this is a dragon called Vermithor, who belonged to Viserys' predecessor. When he was on the Iron Throne, and he's known as like one of the largest dragons, so possibly
he's like the Bronze Beast or whatever, isn't he? Orange Beast.
Yeah, the Bronze Beast. So possibly bigger than Rhaegar, which could be very interesting. We did speak before about Daemon and Aemon having this sort of clashing relationship. So are we going to see them going head to head on the back of these enormous dragons? This would be my dream. And I'm hoping it comes true because it would be spectacular. They're both such interesting characters already, a lot of similarity to each other, so seeing them battle it out on the back of these enormous creatures would just be fantastic. So that's my prediction, or what I'm hoping will happen in the future.
I can see it. Janet, what is your big prediction for season 2 of House of the Dragon?
Well, first of all, I just would like to say that I am so happy that it's getting a season 2. I am loving it. Everything about it is just, oh yes, it's giving Game of Thrones in its heyday vibes. My prediction is more someone to watch out for, and I think we need to keep a very close eye on Rhaenys. I know that she was backing it for Rhaenyra towards the end. She was urging Corlys to kind of support Rhaenyra's cause because she thinks she's got a level head on her. But I can't help but think about the moment when everybody's swearing fealty or renewing their fealty to Rhaenyra, and everybody kneels down on the ground. But Rhaenys does not. Even Daemon kneels. But Rhaenys is in the background just smiling and smirking. And I wonder what that means. I think she's a little bit torn. I think she knows that Rhaenyra is probably the best one for the Iron Throne. She knows that she will lead the kingdom wisely and justly. But I think she also harbors a lot of resentment and anger towards Rhaenyra about Laenor's death. When really she should be thanking her because she freed her boy, but okay. And that truth isn't coming out. So I think Rhaenys is definitely one to look out for. I think there might be some conflicts coming forward. May she even turn to the Greens? I don't know, but I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, I think her role in this show is not over yet. Yeah, and from my view, I think it's so difficult. It's so hard to predict. I think you two have got some good, strong ideas there. I think the Daemon Aemon thing makes so much sense. I guess it's like, because we've seen time move so quickly in this show, I'm really curious to know like what time period we're going to get next. But whatever it is, I think my big prediction, which is kind of cheating because we've already seen it, but basically my big prediction is we're going to get a real Joffrey turn from Aegon. I think when we next see Aegon and the Greens and we see King's Landing, I think it's going to be a bad time. I think he's already sinister and creepy, and I think that whatever iteration we see of Aegon next is going to be kind of a dramatic change, and whether he's more evil, more schemy. And I think the same goes for all of the kids in this show. I think just as we saw Rhaenyra and Alicent change over the course of series 1, I'm expecting like when we meet these characters again, we're going to see kind of like the next evolution of them in that way, right? Like Aemon is on the cusp of being like this kind of mighty, terrifying warrior. Aegon is this evil king. Helena's this like slightly kooky prophecy girl. I think we're going to see this. The camera. My prediction basically is that the camera is going to shift away from Rhaenyra and Alicent and onto these characters and their relationship. What does Jacaerys look like now that Lucerys has died? What do Baelor and Rhaena do now that that's happened? Like, I'm really excited to see what this like next generation of Targaryens like do and how they interact, and whether there'll be new alliances forming across those lines that maybe we didn't see before. And that's basically it. Speaking of predictions, season 1 of House of Dragon was a good time. Season 2 is set to begin production next year, and we probably won't get it released on HBO and Now and Sky until 2024. So you've got a bit of a wait until the show is back. But we've had a great time recapping and reviewing these episodes. Thank you so much, Janet and Emma, for joining us kind of week through week. Thank you to David, who couldn't be here today. Thank you to Gabriella, who joined us at the start of the series. It's been really good to sit down and talk through these major points. And if you've enjoyed watching us break down House of Dragon every week, head over to digitalspy.com. You can find everyone who's been on this show write some amazing pieces over there for us. All the time, you can always find interesting ideas and opinions over there. And I'm sure Janet has some crazy things in the works ahead of the season 1 finale. And until next time, stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be back in the new year with a new recap or new review of a new show. But yeah, until next time, thank you very much, and we shall see you soon, hopefully.